In the Pokemon world, Pokemon are everywhere. Just like animals in our world, wherever you go in Pokemon, you're bound to see a myriad of different species roaming around. As of this video, we have over 1,000 different species, a number that dwarfs the just 151 introduced back in the late 90s. But just like wild animals, there are some Pokemon that are far rarer than others, only ever being obtainable through time-sensitive events or just one time throughout a player's journey. But among those, there are also some that are so rare that they could be considered lost to history. Today, I want to talk about some Pokemon that are so hidden in the depths of the franchise that you probably will never get to see them with your own eyes. Let's take a look at the rarest Pokemon of all time. I don't often mention the spin-off games since many of them are far detached from the main series games, but today I want to take a look at a spin-off series that has ties to the mainline games, the Pokémon Ranger games. Yeah, did that bring you back? Personally, I've never finished any of those games, and I found the stylus mechanic to be a bit annoying, but it was cool seeing all of your Pokemon follow you around as you explored. But that's besides the point. What secrets does Pokémon Ranger have to offer? Well, the Pokémon Ranger series has a little more to it than meets the eye, and those secrets lie in the final entry of the series, Guardian Signs. You see, the Pokemon Ranger games all had a feature called Ranger Net, which allowed you to access special missions that rewarded you with Pokemon. Many of these Pokemon throughout the series could be considered extremely rare and special because they're owned by unique trainers and have moves they normally would learn at later levels. However, Guardian Signs decided to take things a step further. 4 out of the 6 missions rewarded you with the gift Pokemon upon completion, being Deoxys, Heatran, Manaphy, and Shaman. Out of the 4, the Deoxys forms, Heatran, and Manaphy were all unique. You could obtain an attack form or defense form Deoxys that had the exclusive moves Meteor Mash and Detect respectively, which outside of the Ranger games couldn't be learned elsewhere. Similarly, the Heatran had the move Eruption, which to this day is strangely still the only time it's ever gotten the move, even though it makes perfect sense for it to get Eruption. And of course, last is the Manaphy, which is infamous for being one of the rarest shiny Pokemon to hunt for, requiring you to trade and hatch an egg to a brand new save file for each attempt to hatch a shiny. Outside of the Manaphy egg though, the rest of the Pokemon are sadly unobtainable, their Wi-Fi exclusive events being discontinued at the beginning of 2011, 13 entire years ago. It's awesome that Game Freak added these secret Pokemon as a gift for avid Pokemon fans, but it's also unfortunate because we might not see a Heatran with Eruption or a Deoxys with Meteor Mash ever again. Mew. It's a Pokemon that's been shrouded in mystery and obscurity ever since its debut. For all of Pokemon's history, Game Freak has gone out of their way to make sure that this psychic kitten stays hidden in the shadows as much as possible. You can try looking everywhere, in the depths of the Amazon rainforest, in an abandoned laboratory, or even underneath an unassuming truck. But no matter what, Mew is nowhere to be found. Well, that is, besides one game, My Pokemon Ranch, which I discussed in an older video. But while this may be a difficult Mew to obtain, there's arguably one more that's even harder to get. And to find it, we need to go all the way back to Pokemon's infancy. Pokemon Pinball is a game that a lot of people probably don't remember, or at least if you do, most recall playing the Game Boy Advance version. But we're talking about the Game Boy Color version. It's your standard pinball game. You hit the ball using your 2 paddles and hit things to earn points. Of course, there's also the signature Pokeball catching feature here too, where you can occasionally catch a random Pokemon after scoring enough points. Since this was Generation 1, all of the original 151 Pokemon are present. But in classic Game Freak fashion, there was one Pokemon that remained more elusive than the rest: Mew. I think the Pinball Mew might just be worse than the Ranch Mew simply because it's technically possible to catch it. Just so excruciatingly time-consuming and unfairly difficult that it's not even worth your time. First, you need to encounter Mew, which requires you to beat all 3 bonus stages twice. To unlock the bonus stages, you need to either catch or evolve 3 Pokemon. Once you've completed the stages twice in a row, you get access to the Indigo League table, where you have a mere 2% chance to encounter Mew each time you get the chance to encounter a Pokemon. But then, finally, after hours of mindless button mashing, you get to see Mew. And then, you realize that you can't catch it. The developers made it theoretically possible to catch Mew, but in order to do so, you need to hit Mew with the pinball many times within just 3 minutes. How many times exactly? 50? 100 even? Well, how about 1024? Yeah, that's approximately 6 hits per second, meaning that, unless if you have the pinball skills of a god, or you're just a filthy cheater, the Pokemon Pinball Mew will be a prize forever sitting behind a glass wall. Always just barely out of reach. When thinking of the rarest Pokemon, one common category of Pokemon that comes to mind are shiny Pokemon. After all, they were created with the intention of being incredibly difficult to find. From Gens 2 to 5, they had a 1 in 8,192 chance of being encountered, and from Gen 6 onwards, it got buffed to 1 in 4,096, which is still unbelievably rare. But not all shinies are created equal, and this got me thinking, what truly is the rarest shiny Pokemon of all time? Well, there are several contenders. The first that comes to mind is the Wishmaker Jirachi. To celebrate the release of the new Pokemon movie and the new Pokemon Coliseum game, Pokemon included a special bonus disc along with certain copies of Coliseum. But the catch was that the only way you could get a bonus disc was by pre-ordering the game, which is reflected in the high price you'll have to pay now to get a bonus disc. But even if you spent $200 for one, you'll then need a Gen 3 game and have to reset your save file each time. The second are shiny Shadow Pokemon, also in Coliseum. Why? Well, Shadow Pokemon are normally not supposed to ever be shiny, but due to a programming error in the original Pokemon Coliseum, Shadow Pokemon could be shiny, but there was a catch. Because of shininess being determined by trainer ID, when the opponent sends out a shiny Shadow Pokemon, it'll never be shiny. It'll only turn shiny once you purify it. These aren't incredibly difficult to get though, it's just a tedious process having to sit through a cutscene for each attempt. But what I think may be the most elusive shiny is shiny Arceus. For the 18th Pokemon movie, for just a few months, in Japan only, you could have pre-ordered a ticket for the movie that contained a unique serial code. By redeeming the code, you'd get one of 20 Arceus, holding either one of the 18 plates or a silk scarf. But for a few lucky people, they'd receive something a bit different, a golden Arceus holding a silk scarf. Strangely, multiple other Arceus distributions were hosted around the world over the next year, but none of those had the possibility of obtaining a shiny Arceus. For some completely unknown reason, whether that be an oversight or a super secret Easter egg, this single, short distribution has been the only time Arceus has ever been legitimately obtainable in its shiny form. If you were lucky enough to get the 1 in 20 shiny Arceus from this distribution, you're one of the only people in the world who had, and might ever have, the opportunity to get this golden relic. Finally, let's take a trip down memory lane and look back at one of the coolest yet most forgotten Pokemon accessories, the Pokewalker. If you grew up with Gen 4 like I did, I'm sure you remember getting one of these and probably not even knowing what to do with it, and just not using it and losing it soon after. But for those who took the extra time to incorporate the Pokeball-shaped pedometer into their lives, they were met with the secret world full of mysteries. The way that the Pokewalker worked is that it would track each real-life step you took, with 20 real-life steps equating to 1 watt. Watts could be used to encounter wild Pokemon or unlock new areas to take your Heart Gold or Soul Silver Pokemon on a stroll. The Pokewalker was also the only way to obtain a few Pokemon in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, such as Sharpedo, Castform, and Lumineon. But what I want to focus on here are the Pokemon with exclusive moves. You see, the Pokewalker really wanted to reward those who stuck around at the time. For small windows of time, you could download special areas to explore, and these areas would often have one-of-a-kind Pokemon that you couldn't obtain elsewhere. For example, in the Yellow Forest, you'd be able to encounter Pikachu that could have the moves Fly, Surf, Volt Tackle, and Flail. But the most intriguing Pokemon of all lie in the Winter's Path. All of the Pokemon encountered here have special moves, such as a Beldum with an actual complete moveset and a Magikarp with Bounce. But out of all of them, the one that stands out is the Munchlax, which knows the move Self-Destruct. It's not particularly groundbreaking, but it is the only way that Snorlax can get the move Self-Destruct in Gen 4, so there's that. I do think it's interesting though that the only other way Munchlax can get Self-Destruct is by inheriting it from a Snorlax, which itself requires you to evolve a Munchlax knowing the move, which could only be obtained by actively using an obscure Pokemon accessory at the right place, at the right time, and being lucky enough to encounter one. In a way, it's kind of poetic. Pokemon is all about exploring the world, discovering new things, and finding yourself as a trainer. And the Pokewalker bridges the gap between Pokemon and reality, giving you rewards for doing just that, exploring your own world. But I think regardless of the Pokewalker being an over 14-year-old relic of the past, its message speaks just as loud today. Take a moment to look outside, admire the beauty of the world we live in, and find who you are. I know it'll happen.